Hi, I'm Bobby Reynolds from the Canadian Equity Research Team to talk about the impact of the latest Canada-US trade news on Canadian banks, industrials, and the automotive sector. So trade talks, we appear to be close to a deal with the US to reduce the Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber over this past weekend. Those talks broke down. Both sides gave differing reasons for why there was a breakdown. And then Trump came out with a truth post threatening up to 50% tariffs on Canadian autos, including auto parts, to be effective January 1st, 2027, if a new deal isn't reached by that time. So the market is reacting to that. We see some of the more potentially impacted stocks selling off significantly on it. From my perspective as an analyst, what I'm looking is what are the potential earnings implications of these moves if they play out versus what are the off-ramps now for both sides. So from the earnings implications, we could start with the banks. From a high-level economic impact, the overall US tariff burden on Canada is still relatively low. It's estimated Canada had about a 5% effective tariff rate on our exports to the US before the new tariffs became effective over the weekend. Now that bumps up to about 7.5%. The Canadian banks have actually been provisioning for a worse outcome, potentially a 10% plus effective tariff rate. So the banks are likely well positioned to see this through as long as things don't continue to escalate further from here. There's also obviously the prospect that Carney mentioned over the weekend that we'll see more government stimulus to counteract the impact of these US tariffs on the affected sectors. And I should also mention that there's a large Canadian investment summit in a couple of weeks where Carney's invited investment leaders from around the world in an attempt to showcase the investment projects that we have in Canada. So the Canadian government is really pushing into this domestic investment agenda, I believe likely to be led by investment into the natural resources sector. And to me, this trade outcome makes a doubling down on that policy initiative more likely. When it comes to the automotive sector, Canada has large automotive suppliers. It's important to note that under the current regime of the 25% tariff on finished vehicles made in Canada, it's had very little to no impact on Canadian auto parts suppliers for a couple reasons. One, the tariffs are paid for by the auto OEMs, which are either US or Japanese based. They are the importers of record into the US of finished vehicles. Secondly, USMCA compliant parts have been carved out with a 0% tariff rate. I think that's one of the uncertainties that the Trump tweet or Truth Social post introduced is that are they going to maintain that USMCA compliance or USMCA carve out for parts, or are they going to tariff all parts made in Canada? If it's all parts in Canada, that's bad for broad auto affordability in North America, not necessarily specifically for Canadian auto parts manufacturers, as again, it will be the OEMs that will have to eat that tariff and then pass it on to final consumers. The third is just to talk about the impact on Canadian industrials. There's the broad economic impact to think about. The actual Section 338 tariff list that was implemented on the weekend doesn't really materially impact any large Canadian listed industrials. It's more about, are there further rounds of escalation? Who are the large Canadian exporters with exposure to the US that have maybe sidestepped or escaped tariff treatment to date? And could they be targeted in a future round of retaliation by the US? I think that's what the market is at least pricing in today. Whether that's right or wrong, we'll see. From our perspective, again, we're just looking at all of the scenarios, which stocks provide the best risk reward, and staying on top of what all of this means for the earnings of all the companies that we're investing in and potentially investing in.